Hello guys, once again it's Matt, and today we have another video. Thank you all the members, all the Patreons. Make sure to subscribe, and let's talk a little bit about the F-2, the Mitsubishi and the F-15, which is the, well, first, the most likely aircraft to be added between the two to the Japanese tech tree, but more importantly, let's discuss a little bit which would be the best option. First things first, of course. As you know, the Japanese tech tree is kinda in a pickle a little bit, you know. At one point, they added the F-15J that we are flying around like right now there, and it's still one of the best F-16s in the game. But there is a point in this thing that there isn't much of an upgrade that I think they can do with this aircraft. Although, yes, this aircraft is kind of a paper aircraft anyway, so they basically can kind of do whatever they want, right? But with the bases that they are using for this aircraft to be an early F-16, but just with BVR, which is basically just a Block 10, but with BVR, right? It means that we are not going to see this thing getting Fox 3 missiles, or even more advanced air-to-air missiles, I don't think. And it kind of will probably remain as an older F-16 that, just like the Block 10s, the nets itself, and something along those lines, right? So something needs to come when they start to add the Fox 3 missiles. Maybe not in the patch itself, but of course there is a lot of talking points and a lot of people just talking about these right now for when these Fox 3 missiles come, when the 4+ generation aircraft come, or just in general when we get the next step up in performance of aircraft, right? And Japan has two options. As I was saying, the F-15J, which is, you know, an Eagle. And then we have the F-2, the Mitsubishi, which is, to say the least, a heavily modified F-16, right? So these two, in my opinion, should already have been added as the, you know, top tier aircraft for the Japanese tech tree. At least one of them. But which of these is more perfect for the role? We have the F-15J, which is a heavy fighter that I'm gonna call it a heavy fighter, but I just mean like heavier than the F-2 and F-16s and stuff, and the MiG-29s. And then we have the lighter, more modern F-2, right? The F-2, I think, has a big of a problem. The F-15 has a lot of variants. Of course, the J variant is the main variant that the Japanese bought and use until this day. Which is basically a C variant, right? But of course, it was upgraded heavily throughout the years, right? So at one point, I think they're even working on adding IASA radars to it right now. So it's an aircraft that initially started using Sparrows, AIM-9Ls maybe, or even like the AIM-9Ps or something like that, to later use the AIM-9L, the AM-3, and then an upgrade to it to use the AM-4, and so on and so on. So, if you remember, the AM-3 is the IR missile. That would be similar to something like the AIM-9M for them, if I'm not mistaken. And the AM-4 would be the counter, or not the counter, but the similar in performance missile that the Japanese have to something like the AM-120, right? And then they got that added. Afterwards, as I was saying, they even upgraded. I mean, they did a lot of upgrades to it. So they can add multiple F-15s, starting with an early variant of it. And that's what I think should have been added instead of the AJ. Just jumping from the EJ to the F-15J, being a little bit more realistic with it, adding an aircraft that really got used in the Japanese Air Force instead of the AJ that wasn't even out of the paper to be added, right? So to their Air Force, right? So it could start with that and then jump like for modernizations of it. Even a modification that you can buy on the aircraft itself would already be enough. Adding more missiles, adding more like upgrades to the radar or anything like that. But probably, of course, Gaijin would add multiple variants to it. While the F-2, it's an aircraft that basically only has one variant, although they could technically add something like a prototype or something like that. But I have a feeling that it doesn't change much to the production aircraft anyway, so they might just add the production version of the F-2 anyway, right? And just basically just go with it. The problem isn't that. As I talked about in like probably 1 year ago or something like that, when the MiG-29s and F-16 started to show, before the AJ was added, we talk a little bit about how basically the F-2 would be too OP. And there's nothing to do with the weapon systems or everything like that. It could actually be balanced with other missiles. There are, you know, things in reality that can twist a little bit to have a gameplay that it's balanced. You see that with many aircraft, many tanks, and many weapon systems like missiles and everything like that. They add what they have to add to make the game as balanced as possible, or they at least should try to do that at least, you know. And the F-2, the problem with it is that the performance of it would be basically what we have from something like the F-16C, but even better in certain areas, because the wings are different and there are some other things that are different from the original F-16, right? But yeah, it has an ESA radar as well from the get-go, so BVR would be very, very good. So at least, I mean, if they change some of the stats and some of the stuff for the F-2, yes, it could be added, but it would be too far away, especially at that time. That's why they added the AJ. But right now, we are starting to get closer to those performances and those missiles and everything, so I think both options could be feasible. But which of these is more likely to be added? Well, in my opinion, adding the F-15 would make more sense, but I gotta be honest, which is more likely? I think both are equally likely. There are arguments to be adding both of them right now, you know, especially if they add the Fox 3 missiles. So while the F-15 could be used, the model could be used in many nations, and it's an aircraft that everybody asks about, the F-2 is basically just a modified F-16, so it's easy to add as well with other parameters to it. And the missiles that they used can be used both in the same, like the same missiles in the same, for the same aircraft. So for me personally, I think the F-15 would still make a lot more sense. It's an aircraft that would be added to at least 3 nations, and it could be a major, like, even like a marketing thing for Gaijin, right? Because it's the F-15. While the F-2, although we would call a lot of attention, it would be basically just a very heavily upgraded F-16. So I don't know, I think they're both equally likely to be added, but I think the F-15 would make a lot more sense for the game itself, and it would just basically create a lot more havoc and just a lot more attention to the game itself. And that's why I think if we receive something for Japan in this next patch, the F-15 is, for me, the one that makes more sense. But that's just a personal opinion. But yeah, which of these do you think is the most likely to be added, if any of these at all? And which of these would you like to see in the game more? Let me know in the comments, and I see you guys on the next one. Bye guys.